Great. So today we want to talk about React props and how you can pass actually data between components. Because before you just worked with components, then just with state. So you had local state, but you didn't play with props. And today, this is actually like state and props, I would say the biggest part of React, because this is what you will do for every single component. You are passing props or you setting state just to store and pass data between components. So let me just initialize React app and npx React app. Yeah, while it's creating. So components, props are like a function's arguments. So you basically, this is pretty much the same. You pass in an argument to your to the component, and you can use it inside the component. So you pass in from the parent to a child. So this is like a hierarchy, because it's technically, you can explain like this is the same when you executing the function where you using your component. You need to, with function you need to pass some props. With components you need to pass some props as well. So basically the same. Can be any type, so you can pass strings, objects, arrays. You can pass another functions, and so when you change the prop for the component, it will re-render that component. Let me just see what we have here, because it would be nice to have something. Come on. Almost. Yeah. I don't want to have anything like that. I want to have this. Okay, so now npm start, right? Start our application. Let me just go to localhost. Yeah, we have our hello friend. So we have a very basic React application. Great. So this time show you Chrome extension for React. Yes, no?
No, I don't think so. Not that I can remember.
Okay, React. So we have a few, two extensions. React DevTools. This is the main one, and we have one for Redux, but we will talk about that a bit later. So what this does, so because I have my React application here, now you should have, oh, I probably need to close it. Wait a second and start it again. Yeah, so now I have a new tabs in my DevTools, right? So I have components. And in my case, I have just one component. So when you click on the component, you can see all props that are available and some other information about the component. So to create, to pass a prop, let's actually do that. Let's create const users. That will be an array. Sam sale me. Okay, so we have 3 users. Without props, how did you do that? How you can render a list of users? So let's say we have UL, right? UL. And here we will have our users.map. Can anyone help me? What should I do?
Map and the argument, like the name of, like, for example, the name.
Yeah, user. And return
the li.
Yeah, li. Looks like my autocomplete won't work. And here we have our user, right? We need, every time you do map, you need to have a unique key for your item. So you just add property key, and because we have username, we are fine with user. So this is it, right? So if you go here, we have 3 names. But we don't want to build the huge component and store and render everything here. And sometimes you have your data in one component and you want to delegate this logic to another component. So let's create another, I'll create components folder. And there I will create a folder, I don't know, users. Like this. And there I will create a users component, .js. So if you install these snippets, React snippets for VS Code, you can do React arrow function component and have this. Export default user, something like that. So now we can delegate this logic to this component, right? The problem is that we don't have users here. And here I want to import my import users from not users, components, users, user. Technically, you can call it, this one can be called, because you have a separate folder for this. This is a difference. I'll show you the difference. So if you have a folder for the component, because you might want to have stylings for this component, etc. So you want to put everything in one folder. So in this folder we will have like, let me show you, like users, SCSS, for example, right? So you have a few files for this specific component. That is why you want to keep them in a separate folder. But you need to repeat yourself, users, and imagine if your path will grow because you will have multiple levels, it will be too long. So what you can do is just to rename this to index, and React will automatically pick up it. So you don't need to specify, you just do users. That should work as well. It will automatically pick up index file from this folder. Okay. So here we have our users. If we save, we got errors, right? Because users is not defined. And user is not defined in our index.js because it's not defined. So to pass them, you just add an attribute which we call property or props to your component, and you can name it whatever you want. It can be kitten, and put your users there. But if you call it kitten here, then you will have in your props, you pass in props as a one object. So if I add multiple items, kitten number equals, I don't know, to whatever, the props will contain kitten and number keys in this object, because props is an object. So I will just destructure quickly my kitten from props, and let me actually want to have users, right? I don't want to have kitten. Let me remove this one, we don't need it. And users, so now we have users here. Save, looks like we're rendering. We still have the same layout, right? So we're passing that from one component, the data from one component to another component. Yeah? Does it make sense? Questions?
Yeah, just a random one. I thought like the entry point, like entry file is app.js, where we code and then we link other files like the components or the like index.js. So yeah, like rather users array being in .js, app.js, it should be in index.js. Would that make any difference, or would it be easier? It can work either way.
So you mean in this? You mean this one, right? Here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So imagine that you have another component that will use users. Other component. Right? And it also needs to have users. So you need to share it for both. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That is why you can't use just in both users, because you want to have a single source of truth. So if you modify this one, you want to pass to both. Does it make sense?
Not sure, to be honest.
So imagine you have users list here, and you want to have another component. Let's create another component and call it players. So there I will create index. Yes. That arrow function component should be players. And we will pass props, and I want to render the same list of users. This, something like that, right? So we're sharing the same list of users. So if I oh right, I forgot to, let me copy everything from here. Here I will have h3 players. And we have users and we have props, right? So now we have one section where we're rendering just users, and another section we're rendering players. See that we are sharing the same list of users. That is why I want to keep it on this level, because I need for both components. Yeah? Yes? No?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
And now we have here in your components, you can see that we have one parent component and two children, right? Users, which has props users with an array, and we have players, also has the same prop with, and we can actually call it not users because it's players. So let's be semantic, players. So here that will be players, and we will change it to this one. Yeah. Refresh. Yeah. So now if you go to this component, we have players. So this is how you're passing props to the component. And let's create some actually a bit smarter thing. So I want to create a state for our app, because I want to be able to add a new user. So, and you will help me to do that. So to store data in the component, what do we need to have? Any suggestions?
Like a name of the state, like an object.
We need
like
to
that.
have state. You're right. We need to have state. So that means that we want to have here import React from React, and we want to have use state, right? So now we can create a state, and let's call this state use state users. Here that will be set users, and initial state will be this one, this array. So now it's state driven, right? Still the same output, nothing else, but we have state. So now we can create an input, like a tiny form, to add an input and button to add new users. Input, placeholder, and we have add new user, and we have button add. Right? So you have a simple layout. Add new user. So can anyone tell me how to handle the form? So what do I want to do? No? Okay. So when you're working with inputs, we'll probably talk about it a bit more, but for now, when you're working with inputs, you want to have two ways binding. And you need to remember this phrase because somebody on your interviews might ask you what is two ways binding. And that means that the value for your input should comes from state. So you will create another use state, and you will have like an input value. Input value should be empty string, right? When you render, that should be empty string. And the value for your input should be your input value, right? But so you just set it in one way. So that means that if I put the default value, for example, hey, I have the value. I can't change it. I'm typing, but I couldn't change. And this is because I want to have an input change handler to change the state. So every time I'm change something in my input, that will update my state And because I'm update my state, it will update my value, because on change, so I'll show you on change. Let's create const input handler. And you will pass event. Here you will have set input value and pure JavaScript event target value, right? So on change, you want to call this function. Is it clear so far? So when you change, logic is this. So when you render the component, it will set the default value to your input, which is empty string. Then when you start changing, you will call your function that will set a new value to the input, and that input value will update your input value because you're setting it from the state. So because you're updating your state, it will modify this value, and that is why you will get the new value in your input. So we call it two ways binding, because now your input driven by state. Does it make sense?
A little bit.
Okay.
As we keep on going, we might, get better.
Okay. Yeah, so for now, we are kind of able to update the state. So let's go to our app. See that we have two states, right? We have one state with array, the second state is empty string. So let's start typing. You can see that we are updating the second state, right? So looks like our handler is working. Okay, so now for our form, we want to add another listener on submit. And we want to probably have like form handler. So you want to create another function. In React, you will see a lot of, and you will write a lot of functions like that, like tiny handlers that will handle some specific action. And on the handler, so you want to pass event, because this is form, so you want to event prevent default, right? Because you don't want to re-render the whole component. And the next thing, you don't do anything you don't take any values from the form, nothing. You just adding, so set users, you call set users, spread your old users, and add a new user from your input value, right? This is the first step. So you'll add a new user. So let's try. New user, hit enter. We just added a new user, right? But we still need to refresh this input. How can we do that?
And we just set the value back to empty string?
Yep, exactly. So for now, another thing that we want to do is set input value to empty string. And now that should work. So let's try again, refresh, new user, hit enter, beautiful. And we can add things to different components, right? So that is why so normally how you work with your state is you setting your state in the component, in the topest level of the components tree where you need it. So let me just draw it because it doesn't make sense. Warframe. Come on. Frames. Yeah, okay. So imagine that we have one component, another component. We have one more component. We have maybe two more components. Did Sam show this tree to you or no? No? Okay.
Wait, sorry, to repeat that. Sorry.
Did Sam show it to you? Did that kind of tree?
Mate, it's a bit hazy. I think he might have, but it doesn't help to. It does help to see it again.
Okay, okay. I'm just trying. Is there any chance to connect them? Crazy too. Okay, give me a second. It's mine. I have a nicer thing. New. Format. So this is my component tree, right? Can you see it, or is not too
cool? Yep.
Okay, maybe I can change just the color for this one. Green. Yeah, that would be better. And borders, something like that. Okay, so imagine that you want to have a data in this component, in your subtopic one, right here. That means that you can store this data here in this component because you don't need it anywhere else, right? There is no point to store it in a central topic, in the main one, or on this one. But if you need this data also for some reason in this component, where do you want to store it then?
In a state.
Which one? This component, this component, this component, which component?
Main topic 2.
Yeah, exactly. So basically every time you want to store the data, you want to have a state, and you want to have some data, you store in that, you declare in that, in the component that is closest to the components that you needed, where you need to use this data. So if you need to have this data here and here, you store it on this level. If you need to have this data, for example, and here, so the closest common component for this one and this one is the central topic, right? So you need to store your data here and pass it through the whole tree to this one and through the whole tree to this one. Because you can't store it here or here because there is no shared components between. So it's always on the highest level, the lowest common level, like that. You should store it on the lowest common level. So if for example, if you go to this tree, if you have data that needs to be here and here, you can store it here. If you want to have this data here and here, the lowest common level is this one. And if you need to have it here and here, the lowest is this one, right? So this is how props works. You basically pass in from the top to bottom. And you're just looking for the lowest common level to declare your state, and from there you will start passing your props. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can pass a callback, right? So you can pass not just a data, but you can pass a callback. So imagine, let me close this one. Where's our code? So I don't want to have this form here. I want to create a form component. Form add user form, right? I don't want to have this form. I want to have a clean, nice tree in my app. So I will go and create my add user form. Add user form. And there I will create an index file. And here that will be FACB. That should be add user form. So here I will have my form, right? But I need to have the value, and I need to have on change, and I need three things to make this form work. So that means that I will pass props. And I need to pass three things to my component. So form handler, input value, and input handler. Right? So here, let me just add another one. I will pass form handler. I will pass input handler, and I will pass input value. Right? So I'm passing one value and two functions. So that means that is not defined from handler. Yeah, right, because we're not getting it, but we'll get it in a second. So technically we can do that like this, right? So because this is an object, so now we're passing. So now, if I change, it will trigger the function that is actually located on this level and will run your code from here, right? So you pass in a function like a callback, the trigger that you want to have and call when you change something. So you pass in the callback. And let's try, does it still work? User looks like it is. Yeah. So now if you go to, for example, to add user form, you can see that we pass in three props, right? First is a function, form handler, then input handler, and then input value. So if I start typing, we are passing the prop input value is different, right? So you can pass different things. And this is how you normally structure your code, because ideally you want the lowest level of components should be dumb. So you don't want to put any logic there. So if you have add user form, you don't want to build any logic, don't want to keep any state here, don't do anything, because you can outsource it. Theoretically, where do you use this one? You use for your form handler, right? So you need this value on this level, and you have input handler. So theoretically, you can combine both, because you can put it inside, right? Forget about the dumb component and move it here. So you'll have your use state. You will have now on chain, you have your local function, variable is local. But now when we call, so we don't have these two things now anymore. But for this function, now we require input value, right? How are we supposed to get it now? How can we get it? Any ideas? This is JavaScript, by the way, now. So think about this form handler as just a regular function. So if you call this function, you can call it with parameters, right? So you call it with one parameter, which comes from your form by default, but you can call with two parameters, right? So you can pass actually input value. But that means that you need to pass it because you kind of sending, but it doesn't exist. Set input value. Oh yeah, right. So you don't want to call this one. Ooh, see, now we have a problem. We actually now can reset. Theoretically, we can do that from there. So we want to create a local form handler. Form submit. Oh yeah, right. Normally, I would say, so this is like form handler. This is another convention that if you have a local function, you call it handler, so form handler. But if you're passing something, you're passing that as not form handler, but on form change, on form submit, sorry, submit. So you're saying that on form submit, you want to do this. And this is what you're receiving here. So you will call your function, this one, we still failing, we do nothing. But now from props dot on form submit, you want to pass, as you remember from here, you want to pass event and you want to pass an input value. And you have both, right? Because you have event and you have your input value. So you're kind of merging these two, you kind of linking to each other, right? So you have a local form where you're handling your input value, and then on form submit, you just call in this one, which will prevent default to not submit. Oh, by the way, it shouldn't be here as well, because you don't even need event then, right? How nice it can be. So we have just a tiny nice handler where we just add in a new user, and we want to have our prevent default here and remove our event from passing to the first function. I'm happy to go through it again if you think that it is confusing.
Yes, please.
Sorry? Yes, please? Okay. Yeah. So let me just close. So we can have this form handler on this level, right? And we need to have this input value from here. Let me actually command Z so you will see. Ooh. Handler. That. Like this. So this is how we had. So we have a form which is dumb component. It doesn't have any logic, right? So you call everything from here, and you have logic, your functions and state you have on this level. So we call such components dumb because they don't have any logic. They are basically rendering the content. But you might think that you don't want to keep this logic. Why do you want to keep this logic, like input handler, if you don't have any inputs in this component? So you might think, I actually want to have everything related to the form. I want to keep it here in the form level, in my form component. But I still need to add a new user to this list because we need to have these users in users and players. So all I want to have actually here is just the function that I will call on submit on the submission of this form, and store this data, push this data, call some function and set it to this. I will change to our users, right? That is why you basically reorganizing. Let me just go further. I'm not writing anything new. I'm just reorganizing the code. So because I have my form here, I have input change handler. That is why I moved it here to this level. So I have input change handler on this level. And that means that I'm changing the input value, so these two should be on the same level. And I'm setting my input value here, right? Because I don't use this anywhere here, not inside my components. I don't need to share with these components, with users or players. So I can keep it on this level. For the form handler, again, prevent default can be here because it's related to form behavior, not something that I want to have here. And again, resetting the state is the same thing because I'm resetting this one, the input state, so it's nothing related to the app component. But the only thing that I want is to pass a new user to the user list in this component, in app component. That is why I'm passing a form handler that besides the internal logic, I will call this one. I will call the function and pass my new user to here. So I will call this function, receive my user, and set a new user. I will add a new user to my users. Does it make sense?
Probably have to watch it back a good few times before it sinks in. But yeah.
Okay, so Mushtaq is happy. Great. AJ? Are you still there? AJ? He's sleeping, for sure. Okay. So, yeah, that is why we're just reorganizing basically. And now if you go to our browser, it still works. User. Probably not. So we have some, is not a function, on submit function. On submit form, on form submit, sorry. It is on form submit. So why it's saying it's not a function? Props, oh, I didn't save my app. Now that should work. Yeah, so it is working. So this is how you're passing callbacks. So you can handle them from this side, and you can pass some some arguments or some properties to some parameters to this side through the function, right? So you have the function from your app component, you call in it with some arguments, some parameters, and you just receiving these parameters here, and you can do something with these parameters Basically, you're updating this users list here. So this is how we pass callbacks. Ooh. Yeah, this is what we just did with values and functions. So, what we also have, so we have like a few parameters that you need to pay attention when you add classes. A few props. React doesn't know what is class. It is looking for class name. So you want to pass actually class name if you want to style it. So you can use ID. This is like a regular. So for your HTML text, let's say, you use ID as normally you use ID. You use class names for styles, not classes. For if you have a component, you can put any name, like any name of the property of your props of your properties, because it doesn't matter. You will handle them on the other side, because you're basically saying that I'm sending such things and I'm labeling them in that way, and you can receive them. So you, inside your Pokemon card, you will have props. In your props, you will have name and you will have height. And for example, so on input has on change. This is what we did. You don't write like add event listener as you do in your JavaScript. You just write in on change, or on function on forms as I did. You don't create any event listeners for forms. You just do on submit. So you have quite a few properties from React to make your code leaner, and I think it is nice because you don't need to create all these event listeners. You just saying on change, on submit. What do we have? On click, on blur, on focus, etc. So we have quite a few. So basically, it did like a short syntax for the events. Yeah, so basically this is what we did just now, right? So you can, I've showed you that you can pass just a function, but what you can do is wrap it into anonymous function. And this is because sometimes you want to pass a value. So here, for example, you have onChange, right? And I've created a separate function for that. I created onChange function, but eventually you can just use it directly. You don't need to have a function. You just create an anonymous function and passing it like that. The only thing that you're missing is that you need to put your event, because onChange you will pass an event and you can do like this. So you don't need actually this function at all, because you can write it inline. The only problem that the good practice is to keep everything in functions. So you keep your kind of HTML part as clear as it's possible. So you don't want to kind of write all your logic here in your props. That is why you always delegate into some tiny functions, just to make it lean and clear. It's harder to read such things. But if you have like input handler, you understand, okay, so here's the input handler and this is what we're doing. So yeah, that's definitely every time you write in your React, or you want to delegate, you want to create your tiny functions that will handle some very simple things. Don't put your logic inside your properties. Try to delegate it as much as possible. Yeah, so receiving props. Here, we have, so we are passing our props, we are receiving them here, right? And you can do your props on submit form, right? On form submit. What else you can do? Any JavaScript tricks that you can use to avoid these props, because sometimes it is annoying to have props, especially if you have it, if you use, you have a lot of things and you passing, you just have a lot of props word. How we can avoid it? How we can avoid this props word in our case? This is JavaScript. Try to think.
You just assign it a different name.
So what we can do? We can do, basically you're right that we can theoretically do something like this, props dot on submit, right?
Mm.
You can do this, but you still need to write the whole thing. How it can be shorter, because it can be. Imagine that this is an object. No, not imagine, just remember that this is an object.
Oh, we deconstruct and then find what it is that we want inside.
We can deconstruct. And you don't need this. You can just deconstruct here. And this is what what you're doing in production. You just write in a list if you have multiple things, I don't know, height. Right. I don't know, whatever you're passing, you just write in as deconstructed properties. So now you can just use them without thinking of props. Because it's very easy to miss prop prefix and just try to debug why it doesn't work. And it's not nice. It just makes your lines longer, which you don't want to do. Yeah, so you just...
A random...
Sorry?
Sorry, a random question. I don't know whether it will be good to ask or not, but anyway, I'll ask here because there's a bit of confusion in my mind. It's on the right file, you have used on submit, and the left when you have used on form submit. Is there any difference between two, or just a keyword?
Yeah, so here, the good question actually. So here on submit, this is a React property that you're adding to form. This is a native React thing. And you need to add it only to form element. But here, you calling just as whatever you want. It can be kitten because you pass into the component. Because when you're working with components, actual components, you can name your properties whatever you want.
Oh, that's a key, is it, on the left?
What do you mean? This one?
Yeah, it's like a key.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because basically, so on this side, this is a key for your props object.
I see.
So yeah, that can be kitten, and you can have kitten here, and you'll call your kitten here.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and for form, this is actually a thing on submit. Okay. So yeah, this is basically what we just talked about. So you just pass in your props, we just slowly go through it. You also can have, again, you can have conditionals, right? Because React is super flexible, even more than JavaScript. And you can have conditionals. It's like, I don't know, form. If I set, for example, render title, or is title visible? For example, I will pass true, right? Oh, sorry. I will pass another property, And here in my form, I need to have title, not h3. Form title. Let's go my form. Can you see that it's highlighting that something is wrong? Do you know why it is wrong? So I'm not doing any logic, anything else. Why it is wrong? So React can return you only one thing. So if you want to return two things, you need to wrap it into something else. So you can do div and wrap everything. So now it is valid because React component will return you only one thing. That is why it's throwing you an error. But you might say that I don't want to have divs everywhere, right? Because you just write in div, 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 div. You have a lot of extra divs that you don't need in your structure. So let me just show you that if you go here, refresh, go to the elements, inspect. So you have an extra div, right? Useless div, just because of the React. But React provides you an element which calls fragment, which basically is just an empty brackets. And React will treat it as just a wrapper for React, basically, and will never render on your page. So now, if you go back, you can see that in our form, we don't have the wrapper, right? We have just h3 and the form. So this is fragment. And you will use them a lot when you want to return the multiple things, but you don't want to have a wrapper. Sometimes you want to have a wrapper, so you can have your div or whatever you have, but sometimes you don't. And you just wrap it into fragment. The old syntax for that was react.fragment, which is very ugly. I don't know who created that, but this is the old syntax. And you might still, in some platforms, you might find it. Questions? Yeah?
Yeah. When you say it can only return one thing, but I can see two tags, which is the farm and the button, and so is the only third tag is h3. So when you say one thing, what exactly you mean?
I mean that return, after your return, you need to return only one thing. If I remove my wrapper, now I have two things. I have h3 and form. Yes?
I see, yeah, because the whole thing, the button and the form are inside each other. So, yeah.
So if I remove my h3, now it is valid because form is just a one thing. Yeah, like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So you can write, and based on such things, you can write conditionals. So you can wrap it and have is visible render title, right? So we don't have anything. Is it because we're not passing? Oh, right. That's it. I haven't saved my app. Yeah, so now it is visible, right? If I change it to false, now it's not visible. So now you can build a very flexible template with different conditionals, and you can tailor forms because by passing different props, right? So you can actually tailor the layout inside. And like a shortcut, because you can write true, and you can have it, or it will recognize as true if you just put a name. It will be, by default, it will be true. It's still here. So if you go to components, go to our add user form, see, by default it is true. If you put in it there. If you remove this one, that will be treated as false. And now you don't have it. Because you don't pass in it inside. Questions? No? Okay. Yeah, so theoretically, you can do something like conditionally, you can add some classes. You can have like a class name, I don't know, margin top. This is my class name, but I want to render this class name if I have a table, I want to have a margin top class, right? Sorry. That's like. If not, the problem with this one will be that if it's true, I will render the top. Refresh. On my form, I have margin top, right? But if I remove this one, okay, it's removed actually. Sometimes, remind me. Sometimes it can put as an undefined value. So yeah, that's beautiful. But yeah, you can render classes conditionally as well. You can do different things by passing different props, and you can, as I said, you can tailor the whole layout for your component and do different things, and different behavior can be based on props.
So apart from those, that condition is title visible, are there any other conditions as well? Like if the class is visible, if the heading is visible, whatever like that?
So you can pass as many props as you want, or you can pass classes and pass a string, right? Form, name, form. And then just take classes, receive it here, and then set as class name like this, right? So you can style it in this way. Because, for example, you might have, this is what people normally do with buttons, because when you create a button, you normally create a button component. And for button component, you might have a few stylings like small, medium, and large, and like submit, cancel, and error. And you can have one component, but and have all styles inside that component, inside button component. And by passing different props like size, medium, style, or color successful, and you will make medium button with green color, or you will pass big and danger, and you will have big red button based on stylings that you will write. But this is the logic, that you can create like a generic component that you can reuse everywhere, and you can, by passing different props, you can tailor it and make it whatever you need. Yep. Okay. Oh, sorry. We were there.
Hold on for 1 second. If we go back to that previous slide.
Previous slide, yeah, sure.
Well, I think it's in the code as well. But you see when you set the const name, set name in the square bracket.
Yeah.
I think to better illustrate, in the code editor, one pops up as blue. I'm kind of sure why that is.
This one.
Yeah, so like, yeah, and there's a few other ones, like if you go to the one on the left as well.
Yeah.
Set user, I believe. So yeah.
So
what's the difference?
The difference is that this one is a value,
Mm-hmm.
The actual value, so it can be object, array, string, number, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is a function, and my code editor highlighting functions to blue, right? Because this one is a function.
Mm-hmm.
Same here. See that every single function is blue.
Okay, cool.
And
so you see when we do the const in the square brackets and then we have a value and then a function, is that compulsory when we want to do the use state?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this is like a syntax for use state. The first argument that you're destructuring, because basically you're destructuring use state, right?
Okay.
And the first argument that and it is an array, and the first is the value, and the second is the function to change that value.
Function, okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Cheers.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Yeah. So we have this props, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I probably should show it to you. So in good old days, like 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, we used class components. And to be honest, let me try to remember. But yeah, we have a short syntax for that. So class-based components, let me just comment it out this one. Let me comment it out everything. So React class component, and the name was users. So this is a class component, and this is the old syntax of creating components. And you have render, so you don't have just return, because this is the class. You have a method render that defined by React. And if you do something, you want to have, if you want to have your props, let me just show you an example. So we want to have our props. But we don't use props.users, it will not work. Because this is a class, we will use this.props. This.props. And if you want to declare a state, you need to do this. State equals, and for example, object. What's going on? Ooh, right, sorry, new syntax. We have even older syntax, like 5 years ago. We supposed to have a constructor where you will have this state, and you can define some state, I don't know, name, Alex, age, 25. So this is the very old syntax. And here you need to map this dot props equals props. This is very, very old syntax. In our case, so basically we don't have state, we have just this props, and now you can use this props. So you're mapping to this props. Newer version, you don't need to have a constructor, you can just use this props. And with state example, let me just get outside. With the state example, to change the state, you had, like, for example, you have const, not const, you don't have const. You have just a handle state, for example. This is just a function. And here you will have set state, this set state, sorry, and you will change it with some, I don't know, new properties. Like, for example, you have name, Alex, and age 25. So you can, if you want to add a new property, you will take the, as usually, just JavaScript, spread the old one, and add, I don't know, city London, right? If you want to add a new property. But again, this is the old syntax, and that is why, and you have this because it is a class. But these days, we don't use it at all. So you might see it because it's relatively old, because it's like two years old. 2.5, yeah, something like that. 2 probably. So it's starting from version React 16 point something, 16.8, I think, or something. It moved to functional components. And this is a big shift actually, because JavaScript, when it started, it was like a object-oriented language, and they tried to mimic Java, which is just object-oriented language. And now they they already in the direction to move to functional programming and functions. And that is why React as well, 2 years ago, they shifted from class components to functional components. And the new way to write your components is to create functions. So you just create in a regular function, you declare that this is React, and you need to create a regular function, and that will be treated as a component. So you didn't need to create classes. Does it make sense? Yes, no? So yeah, the idea is that you will see this props somewhere. You just need to, but you will see that this is inside classes, not inside functions. So feel free, I bet that every time you will see the class components, you'll be allowed to rewrite it into functional components, because people don't use class components anymore. So this is just a legacy code. Yeah. Yeah, so here's an example basically. This is class extends with React component. You have state. So this is the syntax, a slightly old syntax, not very old syntax, because you don't have constructor. So this is, and you use your this props to get your errors, or to get any props from that. Yeah, so I just showed you how to refactor. We can actually refactor all components. Let's do that. These props. We don't need state. So let's try. That should still work, right? Export default class users, these props users. Save. Ooh. Users of undefined. Oops. Now it is working. Yeah, spellings. So still working. So let's go and do the same for our players. Can you help me with that now? So I know that you can be lazy and just do our class component, RCC, and just rename it to players and copy this one. Replace and comment again this props. This props players, that will work, hopefully. Save, let's try. Yeah, still running. Let's do the same with so let's keep app, but I think that will be fun with our form, right? Because we have quite a few functions, we have some state. So let's actually refactor that. Let's refactor that.
So we don't use anymore this and class structure. We do you still use them?
No, we don't use. So again, because it's relatively old, so it's like 2-3 years old, you will see them. You will definitely see them. But we don't write any new components with classes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I just want to show you the syntax so you will be familiar with that. So we have render. Let me just render my form. Okay. Yeah, so now we want to have this props is visible. Here we want to have a local variable, right? So we want to have our form handler. But that means that we can't have const. You don't need to have it because this is a part of the class. Another thing, we have classes, so that should be this props classes. And now we have state, right? We have input value and input value handler. So this one should be as well this props and submit with input value which we don't have and set input value we don't have as well. So let's create it. So we have state which equals to so this is the ugly part, because with new syntax you can have like your user input and you can have users and this is different states, right? So it can be nice, it can be splitted, but with the old one you will have like just the global state, the state for everything, and you will use it like this state input, and here you will have set state input as an empty string, right? The last bit that is remaining is this one on change handler, input handler. So we want to have this one again, event, and this part will be set state input value target value, something like that. Set state is not defined. Is it this state? This set state? Might be like that. Yeah, so now every time you want to use it, you want to have this. So here is this state input value, here we have just this. Yep, I think that should work. So let me try. User, yeah, it is working. So this is the old syntax for classes, right? So you have state, and every time you want to use it, you want to set it, so you have this dot set state, and you change in the whole thing. And this is very annoying because you might think that it's not a big difference, but eventually if you have a few more things, users, I don't know, the array, some you need to be very careful to not mutate the other part of your state, because you accidentally can break your state and that will break your application. So that was very, very bad approach, and that was very painful, and people, one of the reasons why people like it the new way, because you basically create separate variables and you can change them separately without affecting the other, which is very good. So you're basically splitting your state into different things, into separate variables. In the old way, you have just one state, and it's hard to maintain, especially when it's big. But yeah, for us, for our examples, it looks fine. But if it's big, you will get troubles with managing it. Because if you have objects inside, you have pass-by references, you can mutate it accidentally, a lot of problems. So yeah, but gladly we don't use it at all. Yeah. Questions on this class components? No? I feel like you're saying like, we don't need it. No questions. Yeah. Okay. So Sam wants to ask you 3 questions. Actually, waiting 3 questions from you. So can you please ask any 3 questions? No?
How long did it take for you personally to get this down?
To learn React.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, to be honest. You might think that, a lot of things. But once you are good with JavaScript, this is not hard to pick up. It's definitely not hard, because it's still JavaScript. So you're doing everything, all these methods, everything is JavaScript. So you learn in just a few bits. You learn some state, props, life cycles, how you re-render components and how it's changed and when it's happening, and some syntax for JSX, which is kind of HTML, kind of. We call it, the language is actually JSX. It's not HTML, and this is it. So really, if you start, it wasn't hard. I remember that. Also, I've started from Vue.js, because I remember. So I learned JavaScript, and then I started with Vue.js, and Vue.js is like, it's very, very similar to HTML. It's like HTML style framework. So basically, you have like, you write in HTML and add in like a v-if, v4, I don't know, v-click or whatever, and this is very like, but you're still writing like HTML. But concept is the same. So they have there's the same life cycles, cycle events, etc., like re-rendering and stuff like that. And when I switched, so the story was why, like, I started with Vue.js. It was nice, simple, beautiful. I spent like 2 months learning, and suddenly one day I went to the job site and found that Vue.js positions was like 300 positions in London, I think, and for React was like 5,000 something. Like, I'm definitely learning something wrong. And I switched to React, and that was very easy, because again, React, and I like why I prefer React actually now, because when you're working with React, you're working with JavaScript, and that means that one day when you get back, I don't know, they will change the new trend will become a mainstream. There's some new framework, and you will have some new framework basically. You are good with JavaScript, and for you it's easy to jump to another one, because you're like, meh, I know JavaScript. Was practicing with React the JavaScript for the last few years, and I don't mind. I can switch frameworks. That is why, and it looks like React tried to be more and more leaner regarding their own syntax, and try to delegate more and more to like JavaScript, or rely on JavaScript heavily. That is why it's like very flexible and people prefer it, because it's basically JavaScript. You have few extra bits for dynamic rendering, but this is it. Mainly this is it. Yeah. It's not hard. Trust me. When you start playing with it, it's definitely not hard. Yep. Okay.
For me, I don't know about the others, but for me, I think the hardest part that I'm finding at the moment is wiring the functions, states, and the keywords all together from one file to another file, like the functions defined or declared into one file, and it's being worked on the other one. So do you think, is there any simpler way to understand that entirety of the process, so like which function where, and how is being wired to the how it's working to the other files, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I believe that you're asking more about proper props, right?
Yeah.
So again, the first concept that you need to remember is the lowest common parent. This is the first thing, very first thing. The second thing, I would say, treat this as just a family tree. All components, they are family tree. And you have a parent that can give something to children, and children can ask something from parent. This is their relationships. It's nothing complicated around. It just parent can give by itself something to kids, and if kids want something, they can ask parent with callbacks.
Sounds quite simple, but I don't think so.
So props that you provide into children components, like we have users, players.
Not just the props, but I think the state as well, like how it's being wired from one file to the another file, and how they are linked together.
State sits in one file, so you don't have shared states between components. It's just one state for each component. If I have state here, and I will not pass my properties, my props, other components have no clue about this state. Zero clue. And even if I pass something, they don't know, does it come from state or it's just an array? Because for them it doesn't matter. So state is just for component. It's nothing. It's not something you're sharing with others. Right?
Okay.
So yeah, you can't connect state between different components. The other thing that I would say, that I just want to show you an example. This is actually a good point about life cycles. I think that we will talk about that a bit more later, but here, this is class component. Let me move it back to new shiny syntax. Title is visible, and we don't need any classes. So in form, every time we press a key, right, we will update the state. And I want to show you re-render. So every time you press a key, it will re-render the component, and you will re-render that in a DOM. It actually will re-render everything, rebuild the whole component. So if I go here, refresh, go to console. If I press one key, re-render, one more. So it's re-rendering the whole component every time I press any key, because I'm changing the state. Does it make sense?
Yeah, at the moment it does a bit.
Yeah, so you need to basically be careful with what how you're changing, and do you need to change something? Because sometimes you might think, okay, I will hard code something, and you lost this data because you've re-rendered. So yeah, But again, same with props. If the property will change, so look at this again. Let's go to users and move it back to shiny, like this. Users render. Yeah. So now let me just user form render. If I press 1, it re-render user form, right? One more re-rendering user form. We continue re-rendering user form. But if I click add, it will change props for my users. And because I'm changing props in this component, it will re-render that component. See that we just re-rendered the component of users because we changed props for it.
Yeah. Okay.
And we re-rendered players as well. I just don't have console log there. So if I put it console log here, refresh. So hit. I'm re-rendering because props are changing. So this is life cycle of React. It will re-render component when the props has changed and when state has changed. And why I'm saying that you want to keep your shared state between components in the lowest level, because if you put it, for example, if you have some data that you need here and you need here, so theoretically you can keep your state here, and when you change something, it will re-render only this tree in that state. But if you store this state here, you will re-render the whole application, which is huge performance loss, right? And you might have some states here. You might also have some data that you had some buttons, you changed some local states, and you had everything in place. And suddenly, because you put this state rather than here, this state rather than here, but here, and change something here, it will refresh the whole application and you lose all these states. That is why you need to put it as low as possible, the state, the lowest shared common state, the lowest common component. Right? Okay.
And have you used Angular?
Yes.
So what's the difference between React and Angular? Does it look like same as a little bit React, or is it entirely different?
Depends on the version, and that is why people avoid Angular. Because, for example, I used to work with Angular 1.6, and to explain why it is so bad, is that Angular version 2.0 is not compatible with 1.6. It's not just different, it's not compatible.
Yeah, they entirely changed it.
Just everything. And now they have like version 8, I believe, and people just don't trust Google anymore. And because because the Google, we all know these stories from Google that they've built the whole application, like I don't know, G+, right? And just shut that project, or they shut this project, or they just bored with this one, and they just closing everything. And same with Angular happened. And I know that now even Google, for some projects, they use React.
But still, Angular is the second largest, the framework being used after the React, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. But again, this is because it was built before React. So we have a lot of old applications with old Angular that are migrating to React now. So it's like, PHP is the most popular language. Yes, because of WordPress.
So what was that? The first part? I missed your first part.
PHP.
PHP. Yeah.
Yeah, it's why it's very popular. Maybe it's great. No, it just WordPress is so popular that everybody's using WordPress, and they need some people who will assist and help them to maintain WordPress. It's not because PHP is so great. Because
so basically, Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
So basically, you're saying that learning Angular wouldn't be a wise decision. Is that what you mean?
No.
Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. This is waste of time. I would say that even Vue is better than Angular now.
What about Next, which is like
Next
sort
is
of
this is state management.
Yeah.
We will talk about state management a bit later in with Redux, because Redux is the main state management tool for React. It's like agnostic.
And the
Sorry?
The alternate is Next. JS.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Yeah. And Next is more popular. I'm not sure about Angular, but I know that people use Next with Vue.
I see.
They have some Vues, I think, based on Next or something. But yeah, I'm not very familiar with this part. But if you do the same what I did a few years ago and go to like job sites and check how many vacancies you have for React, for Angular, and for Vue, you'll understand why we are teaching React.
Cool. Yeah. I know there are lots of jobs for React, but I think they ask you for at least 3 to 5 years experience.
No, come on, no, that's not true. I mean, of course, now it's weird time, to be honest, because companies they think that they will still can wait until everything back to normal and they can hire juniors on site. But I think that they will get to the point they will understand that, okay, we still need developers. We probably need to start hiring juniors and figure it out how to onboard them.
Yeah, how to train them or mentor them.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a weird time now. But I will, by the way, because it's so hard to organize all of you, I want to organize the session with our recruiter. And she can talk about the industry, about how it works now for juniors, and what industry expects from you, etc. So I will think about the day when we can organize this. And
that'll be good.
Yeah, we definitely need to have it. Okay. Thank you then. If you don't have any other questions, I will see you in